Is that better? Good. One congregation I was filling in. Thank you, Dave. I got it. You're up. It's amazing how that works. Anyway, we was there for 3 months, and over the years, as I'd go back, one of the brothers would introduce me. And next year, he was here for about 5 months. Next year, he was here for about 6 months at one time. I thought I was here for 3 months. It just seemed like longer to you folks. So you may seem like it's been 3 months to you, but always glad to be here. I've enjoyed teaching here and, of course, enjoyed speaking here the last few opportunities as well. We are going to continue in the class and in the worship hour on the subject of stewardship. We have already to this point looked at the stewardship of time, the stewardship of talents. This morning during the Bible class, we're going to consider the stewardship of treasures. And then during the worship hour, we'll consider stewardship of truth. And as we begin, we just want to go back and review, since it's been a couple of weeks, just kind of want to get some basics again before we get into the stewardship of treasures. So the definition of the term steward or stewardship is the responsible overseeing and protection of something considered worth caring for and preserving. That means that a steward is someone who's been given a responsibility to handle something. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, 3 different words are used, translated steward, the summary of which is one responsible over something or someone. In the New Testament, 2 different words. The one most commonly being used means the management of a household or of household affairs, specifically management, oversight, administration of others' property. So from a biblical perspective, as stewards, we would show it like this. First of all, that God is the owner of the property. In Genesis 14, 19, and 22, we see Melchizedek and Abraham and the king of Sodom. That's King of Salem, rather. And in those passages, in verses 19 and 22, God is referred to as the possessor of heaven and earth. So God is the owner of the property. We're the stewards. Every good and every perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, with whom is no shadow, neither variableness of turning. So we are the ones who have been given the blessings. We'll see in a minute what the blessings are. But in Acts 17 and verse 25, Paul said on the Areopagus on Mars Hill outside of Athens, he said that God giveth to all breath and life and all things. So we are the ones who have been given blessings. And those blessings are the property. Psalm 145 and verse 16 says that God opens his hand and satisfies the needs of every man or every person. So to summarize, rather, to go back to this before we summarize, the responsibility of stewards is to use the owner's goods wisely. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 31, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. And in Matthew 25, 31 through 46 is a picture of the judgment scene with those placed on the left hand, those placed on the right hand of the Lord in judgment. Those on the right hand are the ones who had used their blessings to the glory of God. They helped those who were sick, those who were poor, those who were hungry, and those who were without clothing. On the left hand were those who saw those individuals in need and did nothing to help them. So again, those 16 verses there, Matthew 25, 31 through 46, indicate a level of stewardship or responsibility that each of us has to use what God has given to us to his honor and glory. So now to summarize, the property owner, that is God, has blessed each of us. Everybody agree with that? Okay. The property owner, that is God, gives us opportunities to use his blessings to his glory. Agree with that? Along with these blessings and opportunities come responsibility and accountability. So we have been given something or multiple somethings to use to the honor and glory of God. 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 2 is the basis of this series. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. Now, in that context, Paul is talking about the responsibility given to him as an apostle or as a preacher of the gospel. But the principle is true, as we've seen from these other passages, that we have a responsibility or a stewardship of what God has given to us. The word faithful there, that a man be found faithful, means trusty, reliable, of persons who show themselves faithful in the transaction of business, the execution of commands, or the discharge of official duties. Now, let's talk about stewardship of treasures, and as you can pretty well guess, we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about material things. Stewardship of treasures. Let's start out with some foundational principles. Turn with me to Psalm 24. in verse 1. These are the underlying principles of this particular lesson. Psalm 24 in verse 1. The psalmist said, "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein." So again, it's just reaffirming what we saw earlier, that the owner, as it were, of the property is God. The earth is the Lord's. Don't ever forget that. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. But now let's look at Proverbs 3 and verse 9. Proverbs 3 and verse 9. Solomon said, "Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the first fruits of all thine increase." So again, we see both sides of this. The owner of the property and the stewards. The owner of the property owns it all. And the responsibility of the stewards is to honor him, the owner, with the very best that we have. That's the meaning of first fruits of all thine increase. So let's talk about some money for a little bit. Let's talk about facts about money. Number one, it's only a tool. You have something around your house that you want to put a hole into. Now, you can smash your hand through there, but it wouldn't be a very nice looking hole, would it? But you want a hole in the wall or a board, or you want a hole somewhere, so most of the times you're going to use, probably, unless you're one of those folks who likes to hack things, most of the time you're going to use a drill with a drill bit. And you don't necessarily want a whole collection of drill bits, but you know if you want a 1/4-inch hole, you got to have a drill bit that's going to make a 1/4-inch hole. So you're not buying the drill bit, you're buying the hole. But you have to have the drill bit to get the hole. So the drill bit is a tool. It's a means to an end. That's exactly what money is. And when we understand it from that perspective, it becomes less of a temptation for it to become a god to us. Would you say that it's a temptation for money to become an idol? Become a god? Money's a tool. That's all it is. It's just a tool. Secondly, money is lifeless, brainless, and powerless. Those guys on the bills are not going to speak up and tell you how to use your money. It's pictures of a bunch of dead presidents and other people. It's lifeless, brainless, and powerless. Like all material possessions, it wears away. You know, annually in the U.S., our government destroys about 7 billion pieces of paper money per year. It equals out to be about 14 billion pounds of money. It's destroyed because it just gets worn out. It goes out of circulation, they destroy it. 1 John chapter 2, 15 through 17 reminds us of the temporal nature of material things, including our dollar bills. 1 John 2, 15 through 17. John said, "Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world, for all that is in the world, if any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world," King James says, "passeth away," but your version might say more accurately, "is passing away. And the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever." So it's wearing out. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19, where Jesus was drawing the contrast between things of the world and things which are of an eternal nature. In Matthew 6 and verse 19, he said, "Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal." I was reading yesterday about a lady on the LPGA tour, Ladies Pro Golf Association tour, and she was ready to participate in a tournament on Thursday morning. She went out to her car from her hotel room, and somebody had broken into her car and stolen her golf clubs and her shoes and everything to do with her profession in golf. So she had to piece together whatever she could find for clubs lying around the clubhouse, some that her caddy had, and so on. Of course, she didn't play as well because she was used to the clubs that she had. But thieves break through and steal, and moth and rust doth corrupt. Ladies, I know you may not believe this, but that shirt that your husband wore in high school and still has hanging in his closet, sooner or later it's going to wear out. It hasn't already. Okay, so things of this world wear away, including our money. How about this? When we die, we're going to leave it all behind. When we die, we're going to leave it all behind. Reminds me of the three fellows who were talking after a gentleman had passed away. Before he passed away, he got the preacher, he got the doctor, and he got the attorney together, and he said, look, guys, I'm worth, you well know I'm worth several $1 million. They say you can't take it with you, but I'm going to try. So what I want you to do is just as they're lowering my coffin into the ground, I want you to toss in part of my money. I'm going to divide it up among the three of you. I'm going to have you toss some of it into your share into the grave. So the three men, the lawyer, the doctor, and the preacher, were talking about this after the man's death. And the lawyer says, guys, I've got a confession to make. I kept $100,000 for myself. Tossed the rest in, but I kept $100,000. The doctor said, well, I got to confess too, I actually kept a couple $100,000. The preacher said, I'm ashamed of both of you. I want you to know I tossed in my personal check for the whole amount. When we die, we're going to leave it all behind. Let's look in Psalm 49. I know that has verse 10, but I want to read all of Psalm 49. I have labeled this. It's not inspired, but I've labeled Psalm 49 Money Psalm. So if you ever want to look at a section of Scripture that deals with money, Psalm 49 is where you go. So let's read the whole Psalm. Psalm 49, beginning in verse 1. Hear this, all ye people, give ear, all ye inhabitants of the world, both low and high, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak of wisdom, and the meditation of my heart shall be of understanding. I will incline my ear to a parable, I will open my dark saying upon the harp. Wherefore should I fear in the days of evil, when the iniquity of my heel shall compass me about? Especially verse 6 beginning. They that trust in their wealth and boast themselves in the multitude of their riches, none of them can by any means redeem his brother, or give to God a ransom for him. For the redemption of their soul is precious, and it ceaseth forever, that he should still live forever and not see corruption. For he seeth that wise men die. Likewise the fool and the brutish person perish, and leave their wealth to others. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. Nevertheless, man being in honor abideth not. He is like the beasts that perish. This their way is their folly, yet their posterity approveth their sayings. Like sheep they are laid in the grave. Death shall feed on them, and the upright shall have dominion over them in the morning. Their beauty shall consume in the grave from their dwelling, but God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. Be not thou afraid when one is made rich, when the glory of his house is increased. When he dieth, he shall carry nothing away. His glory shall not descend after him. But while he lived, he blessed his soul, and men will praise thee when thou doest well to thyself. He shall go to the generation of his fathers. They shall never see light. Man that is in honor and understandeth not is like the beasts that perish. It seems contextually that the writer is dealing with the issue of those who were wealthy and were abusive in their wealth. They were mistreating those who were not wealthy. And he's basically said, don't be afraid of them, because money is not the standard. Because money goes away. When we die, we're all going to leave it behind. We'll leave it all behind. Let's talk about what money cannot do. First of all, money cannot buy happiness. And I know you've heard that. That's a tried saying, perhaps. Let's look in Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11. Because there is an inspired writer telling us this very truth. Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11. And of course, this is impressive when you consider, as we know, the vast amount of wealth that Solomon had. So here's what Solomon did, beginning in verse 1. I said in my heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, that I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do unto the heaven all the days of their life. So basically, Solomon is saying, I decided I'd go out and get everything I could. He had the money to get pretty much whatever he wanted. So in verse 4, I made me great works, I builded me houses, I planted me vineyards, I made gardens and orchards, I planted trees in them of all kind of fruits, I made pools of water to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got servants and maidservants and maidens, and had servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle, above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I got men singers, women singers, the daughters of the sons of men, musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatsoever my eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Now, if you've ever, in your whole life, have ever said, oh, if I just had another couple $1,000, here's what I'd do. Solomon didn't have to say that. Solomon had it. He went and did it. He thought he'd see what it'd be like if I could go get everything I could buy. Verse 11 shows you what it was like. He says, Then I looked on all the works of my hands that wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. Behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. So basically, here's a man who bought everything he could get his hands on. And he looked around and he saw all the things that he had bought with his money, and essentially said, so what? I just bought a lot of stuff. I got stuff in your house? I just bought a lot of stuff. And he said, so what? And as you read on in Ecclesiastes, which most consider Ecclesiastes to have been written in the latter part of Solomon's life, it talks about how you die and leave it all behind. And who knows what kind of person is going to get this. Alexander the Great, the great Macedonian or Grecian leader, general, conquered so many nations. When he died, he had no sons. His sons had both been killed. His kingdom was divided among 4 different of his generals. All that he had built up, all that he had accomplished. First of all, it was gone from him, but secondly, he left it to people who were very unwise. Money cannot buy happiness. Furthermore, money cannot bring peace. Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. Paul said, be careful or be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, that your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. That's where the peace is. I mean, it is, use the word comforting, but it does provide some security to know that we have money in our bank account to help us in case things go wrong, in case we have medical needs or emergencies come up. It's good to know that, and we certainly should be good stewards of our money. We shouldn't be just throwing it all over the place. That's not where peace is. Peace is in God, in Jesus Christ. Look at what he says in verses 11 and 12. Not that I speak in respect of want. This is an important phrase. For I have learned, in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Do we know how to be both sides of that? Do we know how to be full and how to be in need? Because the temptation when we're in need is to complain. Temptation when we're abounding, when everything is going well and we don't have any, as it looks anyway on the outside, it looks like we don't have any physical need, got plenty of money in the bank, got all kinds of material wealth. The temptation there is to think we did it all by ourselves and we don't need God. Paul said, I learned how to be content. We need to learn the same thing. Being content means being thankful for what we have, what God has blessed us with, no matter the condition we are what money cannot do. Money cannot purchase eternal salvation. 1 Peter 1, verses 18 and 19. 1 Peter 1, 18 and 19. Peter said, "For as much as you know that you were not redeemed with with corruptible things as silver and gold from your vain conversation received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ as of a lamb without blemish and without spot." We can't buy our salvation. We're not going to stand before God and say, "Lord, look at the bank account." Because only the blood of Jesus Christ can purchase salvation for us. And it cannot do these things. Here's what we can do with money, though. We can provide for our families. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8 indicates that's our responsibility. If a man does not provide for his family, he's worse than an infidel. We can use money to provide for our family's needs. We can use money to help the poor. We're near 1 John there. Look in 1 John chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. 1 John 3, 17 and 18 says, "Whoso hath this world's good and seeth his brother have need and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth." We can also use money to support the teaching of the gospel. Philippians chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. Paul is commending these brethren. He says, "Ye Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. For even in Thessalonica ye sent once and again into my necessity." So we can use money. It's a tool, and it's useful, and we can use it to the glory and honor of God. We can also enjoy what God has given us. 1 Timothy chapter 6 in verse 17. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 17. Paul said, "Charge them that are rich in this world that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who giveth us richly all things to enjoy." So God has blessed us, and God has given us what we have to enjoy, not to worship, not to live for, but to enjoy. And it's obvious as we all look around that we all enjoy blessings from God, physical blessings. We enjoy our clothing. We enjoy, many of you got here by driving a car or by riding in a car or some method of vehicular transportation. We have the comfort of a nice building with plenty of lighting and seating and heat when we need it and air conditioning when we need it. God has given us these things to enjoy. Then we have this in verses 18 and 19. We can use our money to do good. Verse 18, continuing this exhortation regarding those who are wealthy. "That they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life." And someone might say, "Well, that applies to the rich." Folks, come on. I know nobody would say that here. I know. But let's just think about it from this perspective. We're rich. We are monetarily wealthy. Because that's a relative term, right? How many of you have been to a third world country? Are we rich? Yeah. And even some parts of our own country, are we rich? Yeah, we definitely are. I mean, a change of clothes would be wealthy to some people. More than one day's worth of food or more than one meal's worth of food would be wealthy to some people. We can use our money to do good. There's plenty of opportunity for that. Here's what I want you to see as we go on to the next point in just a moment. Based on all we've said to this point, because money is lifeless, brainless, and powerless, whether it accomplishes good or evil, or whether it helps or harms a person, it's entirely up to the one who's using it. Say that again. Because money is lifeless, brainless, and powerless, whether it accomplishes good or evil, or whether it helps or harms a person, is entirely up to the one who's using it. That gets back to the stewardship matter. It's our responsibility to use what we have been given for the honor and glory of God. It's not money's fault. back in 1 Timothy 6, since we're still there, 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all evil. And I know you've heard that misquoted over the years, money is the root of all evil. No, it's not money's fault. Money doesn't love anything, so guess who's the one being addressed here? The love of money, that's you and me. The love of money is the root of all evil. It's up to us to use money in a good way. We make the determination as to how money influences us. So in other words, will we allow money to make us greedy or giving? In Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 10, again, considering this to be written by inspiration by an extremely wealthy individual, Solomon. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10. He said, he that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. Will we allow money to make us greedy? Someone asked a covetous man one time, a greedy man, asked him a question, how much money is enough for you? And his answer was, it's always $1 more than I have. That's exactly what Solomon was addressing in Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied. And the one who loves abundance shall not be satisfied with his increase. It's never enough. He says this is a waste of life. This is emptiness. This is vanity. On the other hand, we go to 2 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 5. Will we allow money to make us greedy, or will we allow it to make us giving individuals? In 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 5. Verses 1 through 5. Moreover, brethren, we do you the wit of the graces of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering of the saints. And this they did, not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and unto us by the will of God. They were sacrificial in their giving. Why? What was behind it was verse 5 say. What they do first. They gave themselves to the Lord. They counted the things of this world as blessings that they could use to the glory of God. We can allow money to make us greedy or giving. We can allow money to make us envious or joyful. In Psalm 73, Asaph was the writer of that psalm. And he is recalling a time in his life when he had almost slipped away from God, almost allowed himself to go away from God. In Psalm 73 and verse 3, it says that I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. You go on, let's just read a little bit more. We've got time to do this. Read a little bit more in verse 4. There are no bands in their death. Their strength is firm. They're not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. Therefore pride compasseth them about as a chain, violence covereth them as a garment. Their eyes stand out with fatness, they have more than heart could wish. Asaph is looking, because Asaph's being persecuted and things are going rough for him when he's writing this, or recalling a time when things were rough for him. And he looked around him and he looked at the people who were not following God. Here he was trying to follow God faithfully. Things were going bad before him. He looked around him at those who were being disobedient to God. He thought, wow, they sure have an easy life. That's what he talks about in verses 4 and following. You know, when they die, they just die. They don't have any illness. They just go from this life to the next. They don't have any trouble. Everything's great for these wicked people. And they're wealthy. Doesn't matter how they got it. God doesn't seem to care. That's what Asaph had thought for a period of time. That's why it says in verse 3, I was envious. I looked at those who were living wickedly. So we can allow money to make, and of course, this is false, as Psalm 73, he indicates at the end, beginning in verse 19, the psalmist shows that he understood that those who were disobedient to God were not in a good place. They were going to suffer eternally their disobedience to God. Let's look at the other aspect of this. We can allow money to make us joyful. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 26, where Paul is talking about the fellowship of the saints and the body of Jesus Christ, the body that we are. Verse 26, whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it, or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. So let's say that we've got a brother or sister who succeeds, maybe gets a nice promotion, maybe gets a promotion before we do. We've worked at the same place at the same amount of time, and this good brother or good sister gets a promotion before we do. Or maybe they get a nice new car and we don't have one. Folks, up until last year, I was driving a 2003 Oldsmobile van. I still wish I had that thing. Ugly. Ooh, that thing's ugly. But I sure didn't enjoy it after 250,000 miles. Somebody gets a new car, somebody gets some new clothes, somebody gets a nice new house. What's our first response to that? Not casting aspersions or making broad sweeping generalizations. Should we say, what's the temptation sometimes? Oh, well, I wonder what they did to get that. And allow money to make us envious or joyful. And rejoice when somebody rejoices over whatever they have to rejoice about. Whether it's financial things or whether it's health. You know, somebody says, hey, I just got a report from the doctor that says cancer's in remission. Let's be joyful. Let's celebrate. We celebrate things like that, but do we celebrate when somebody succeeds? Or are we envious about it? Then there's this. We can allow money to make us self-satisfied or appreciative. In Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 through 17, where the Lord is addressing the 7 congregations of the churches, 7 congregations in Asia Minor. He's addressing now the church in Laodicea. And beginning in verse 15, he says, I know thy works, that thou art neither hot nor cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth, because thou sayest, I am rich and increased with goods, and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Contrast that real quickly with me. Go back to chapter 2 of Revelation, verse 8. Unto the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things saith the first and the last, which was dead and is alive. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. So here, the church in Smyrna, and they're in poverty, but they're rich. Here's the church in Laodicea, and they're rich, but they're in poverty. They explain that. It doesn't make sense from a worldly standpoint. From a spiritual standpoint, it makes sense. The church in Smyrna was rich spiritually, whereas the church in Laodicea was bankrupt spiritually. And the irony of that is that the city of Laodicea was a very wealthy city itself. You teach in Revelation? Maybe? Yeah. So they were quite prosperous in that city, were they not? Remember what I said earlier about the temptation? When things aren't going well, when we're a little bit strapped for money, the temptation is to complain. When things are going well and we're prosperous, the temptation is to do what? Forget about God. I think we did it kind of like Samson did all the way back in Judges 15. When he slew the Philistines with the jawbone of the donkey. He sat back and said, look what I've done. Then he got thirsty and he couldn't find anything to drink. So he turned to God and said, look what you've done. Same kind of situation there. Self-satisfied. The church in Laodicea was self-satisfied. They thought they did it all themselves. Or will we allow our money to make us appreciative? James 1:17, we've already cited that. The fact that all our blessings come from God. Several years ago, a brother said this, and I could not disagree with him more then or now. He said, the more money I make, the stronger my faith is. Does that seem kind of backwards? It did to me, and it still does. My response was, well, the way I see it, the more money I make, the more my faith needs to grow. Because I don't want that to get in the way of my service to God. Because there's nothing the face of the earth that's worth having, it means losing your soul to hell. Whether you're talking about things or relationships or positions, sell your soul for anything on the face of the earth is not worthwhile. There is nothing on the face of the earth that's worth having. It means losing your soul to have it. That's what Paul said in Philippians chapter 3. When he heard the gospel and he obeyed the gospel. And in Philippians 3, he talks about his pedigree in the Jewish faith. Then he said, but I count all those things as refuse. They're worthless to me. I don't care about the titles. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the prestige because it doesn't mean a thing if it means losing my soul. I count all those things as refuse for the cause of Christ, Paul said in Philippians chapter 3. See, it's all in our perspective. We talk about stewardship of money. Will we allow, since we're the ones who are responsible for our attitude about physical things, what will we allow physical things to do to us? Let's go back to those foundational principles. Psalm 24 and verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God is the owner. Someone said years ago, I remember hearing this as a young man, God is the owner, we're just borrowing. He's got for a little while. Proverbs 3 and verse 9, we're to honor God with our best, with the first fruits. That's the foundational principle. So let's close with this. That's one bell. We may get off a little bit early. Final point is this. As God is our master, you and I must be money's master. Who's the boss? You or your money? Matthew 6 and verse 24. In the midst of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus imparted this principle clearly to us in Matthew 6 and verse 24. He said, you cannot serve, or no man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Folks, money is our slave. Money is our servant. And we are God's servants, stewards of his material blessing. Therefore, let's always make sure we have the proper perspective. Enjoying the blessings that God has given us, but also realizing that he's given us an opportunity to use these blessings as servants of his. We got about 4 minutes left. Anybody want to throw anything in here? Questions, comments? Yes, sir. Yeah, each one, according to verse 16, each one had the ability to use 1 talent, the 2 talents, or the 5 talents. He did not overburden or underburden anybody. That's a good point. So, wherever we are, we have the ability to use what God has given to us, whether it's talents or money. And it's the faith that comes first. Exactly. And that's where I didn't understand why he was, and this is a preacher. I didn't understand his priority. I thought it was kind of mixed up a little bit. Yeah, Job's friends, when he saw they had lost everything, and that continued in Jesus' day in Luke 13, where Jesus talked about those who had some difficulties. A tower fell on some of them, and the Jewish thought was, well, they must have been terrible people. Something bad happened to them. That's not always the case. Bad things happen to good people. Can't outgive God. That's a good principle. That's a good principle. And another question to ask, when should I stop giving? And the response is when God stopped giving to me. All right. Good comments. Thank you for your participation. We'll go ahead and dismiss, and thank you very much.